The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every eye glued to the front. The tension in the air was almost palpable. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, the sound echoing off the cold marble floors, adding to the unsettling silence. The judge, a tall, imposing figure, sat at the bench, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. He had a smirk on his face, one that suggested he already knew how this trial would go, and he was enjoying the show. Elon Musk, a man who had defied the odds for most of his life, stood quietly at the defendant's table, his hands folded in front of him. He was no stranger to pressure, no stranger to the spotlight, but today was different. Today, he wasn't standing before the world as a visionary or a tech mogul. Today, he was in the dock, facing a judge who appeared determined to tear him apart piece by piece. The case was not just about business or technology, it was personal. The accusations against Musk were numerous: manipulation of the stock market, misleading the public, using his influence to dodge accountability. These were not small charges. These were the kind of accusations that could destroy a career, a reputation, and a legacy. But what made this trial even more bizarre was the judge. Judge Nathaniel Hawke was known for his sharp tongue, his no-nonsense demeanor, and his absolute disdain for anyone who thought they were above the law. And it was clear from the moment Musk entered the courtroom that Hawke had made up his mind. Musk was guilty in his eyes, and no amount of legal arguments or evidence would change that. The gallery was full of spectators, some supporters of Musk, others there to see the drama unfold. The media had descended in full force. Cameras flashed from all directions, and reporters whispered to one another, eager to capture every moment. The trial had quickly become more than just a legal proceeding, it was a spectacle. And Musk was the main attraction. "Mr. Musk," Judge Hawke's voice cut through the tension, "I trust you're ready to defend your actions. I'm sure the world is watching to see how the great genius plans to justify himself this time." The word stung, not just because of the sarcasm, but because of the way Hawke seemed to relish in his power over Musk. It wasn't just a legal battle for the judge, it was a personal vendetta. Musk, however, didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his face unreadable, his posture composed. "Your Honor," Musk's lawyer, Sarah Whitaker, spoke up, her voice steady but strained. "We request that the charges be reviewed in light of the facts. Mr. Musk has done nothing wrong. All his actions were in accordance with the law, and any claims of market manipulation are baseless." Judge Hawke didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, staring at Musk with a look that made it clear he found the whole situation laughable. "Is that so?" Hawke's voice was low, dripping with mockery. "You've made billions while playing with the stock market, Mr. Musk. And now, you expect me to believe you've done nothing wrong? You expect me to believe that you, who manipulate media, who create false narratives around your companies, are somehow innocent?" Musk didn't react. His eyes were fixed on the judge, his face calm and neutral. He wasn't here to argue, he was here to win. In this moment, he understood something crucial: the trial wasn't just about the facts. It was about perception. And in the world of public opinion, perception was everything. "Your Honor," Musk's legal team continued, "we are confident that once all the evidence is presented, the court will see the truth. Mr. Musk has always acted with the utmost integrity." The judge's smirk widened as he turned his attention back to Musk. "Integrity?" he scoffed. "Your so-called integrity has made a mockery of the entire system, Mr. Musk. You've made billions off the backs of ordinary people, and now you stand here, acting as if you're some misunderstood genius. The truth is simple, you're guilty." The gallery murmured in response to the judge's statement. Musk's supporters shifted uncomfortably, while those who'd come to see the spectacle seemed to relish the tension building in the room. But then, something strange happened. Musk, who had been silent up until that point, spoke up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, measured, "I've built my companies from the ground up. I've taken risks that others wouldn't dare to take. I've done what no one thought was possible. I didn't get to where I am by playing it safe. But I'm not here to argue about what I've accomplished. I'm here to face the facts, just like you. So, let's start there. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this level of calm from the man who had just been verbally assaulted. The courtroom fell silent. Musk's words were simple, but they carried weight. He wasn't here to fight back in the way people expected. He wasn't here to get defensive. Instead, he was taking a different approach, a calm, calculated approach that would throw the judge off balance. For a moment, there was a flicker of doubt in the judge's eyes. He didn't like it. He didn't like being challenged. And he certainly didn't like being made to look like he was in the wrong. The trial continued, but the tone had shifted. The judge's mockery had done little to rattle Musk. If anything, it had made him more determined. The audience could sense the shift, too. They were no longer sure who to root for. The man who was being mocked, or the one doing the mocking. As the trial unfolded, one thing became clear: this was no ordinary legal battle. And Musk was no ordinary defendant. This was a man who had faced seemingly insurmountable odds his entire life. And now, he was facing a judge who wanted nothing more than to see him fall. But Musk wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. As the day drew to a close, the judge announced a brief recess, his voice sharp. The room erupted into whispered discussions, but Musk remained calm, unfazed. He knew this was just the beginning. The real game hadn't even started yet. But the question lingered in the air: could Musk outwit a judge who seemed determined to bring him down? Only time would tell. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the recess continued, Elon Musk sat alone at his defense table, his fingers drumming lightly on the surface, a rhythmic sound that somehow filled the silence in the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, the reporters gathered, eager to talk to anyone who would give them a glimpse of what was happening behind those closed doors. Inside, however, Elon was lost in his thoughts, his mind wandering back through the years to moments that had shaped him into the person standing there today. He wasn't always the tech mogul, the billionaire, the CEO of the companies that seemed to define the future. He wasn't born into a life of wealth or privilege. His journey began far from the shiny skyscrapers of Silicon Valley, in the suburbs of Pretoria, South Africa. Elon had grown up in a modest home, surrounded by the kind of childhood challenges that most people could never imagine. His father, Elon Musk, was a successful electromechanical engineer, but the relationship between father and son was strained at best. Elon was an emotionally distant man, and their home life was filled with tension. His mother, May Musk, was a model and dietitian who had to support the family on her own while raising Elon and his two siblings. She was a kind and strong presence in his life, encouraging him to pursue his interests even when the world seemed set against him. But Elon, even as a young boy, was different. He was always intensely curious, always thinking beyond the world he was given. He devoured books, particularly on science fiction, and had an insatiable appetite for understanding how things worked. But it wasn't just books that captured his imagination, it was the universe itself. As a child, he would often lie awake at night, staring up at the stars, dreaming of space, of rockets, of a future where humanity could reach beyond Earth. The kids at school didn't understand him. They teased him for being weird, bookish, and different. His introverted nature, paired with his relentless curiosity, made him an easy target for bullies. He didn't have many friends. He didn't need them. His mind was his own refuge, his escape from a world that often seemed too small, too limiting. But there was something else, something that kept him going, something deep inside him that refused to give in. He never let the bullies break him, never let the loneliness consume him. It wasn't easy, but his drive to do something extraordinary kept him on his path. As Elon entered his teenage years, his desire to make a difference began to take shape. At the age of 17, he moved to Canada, choosing to live with his mother's relatives instead of continuing his education in South Africa. It was a decision that would change the course of his life. In Canada, he attended Queen's University before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania, where he would go on to study physics and economics. It was here, in the midst of his studies, that Elon began to realize that his true calling lay not just in understanding the world around him, but in changing it. Despite his academic success, Elon knew that the traditional path to success wasn't for him. The world was changing rapidly, and he believed that technology would be the key to unlocking humanity's potential. He dropped out of Stanford after just 2 days, deciding that the future wasn't going to wait for him to finish his degree. Instead, he jumped into the world of startups. His first company, Zip2, was a software company that provided online business directories and maps to newspapers. It was a gamble, a big one, but Elon's vision was clear: the internet was going to revolutionize everything. After selling Zip2 to Compaq for nearly $300 million, Elon didn't rest. He went on to create X.com, which would later become PayPal, and then, after a series of ventures, founded the companies that would define his legacy: Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company. For most, this would be the pinnacle, the end of the story. But for Elon, it was only the beginning. As Elon sat in the courtroom, his thoughts returned to the many battles he had fought over the years. He had faced far greater challenges than this trial, challenges that had threatened to tear apart everything he had built. The early years of Tesla and SpaceX had been filled with skepticism, with people telling him that his dreams were impossible. He had been told that electric cars would never take off, that space travel was a pipe dream, that he was wasting his time. Yet, he had persisted. Tesla had faced financial ruin more times than Elon cared to remember. The company had nearly gone bankrupt in 2008, just as the global financial crisis hit. It was only through sheer determination and a last-ditch effort to secure funding that Tesla survived. SpaceX, too, had nearly collapsed, with rockets exploding during testing and the company burning through its funds. But Elon never gave up. He kept pushing forward, refusing to accept failure as an option. Now, as he faced this trial, Elon couldn't help but feel that this was just another obstacle in a long line of challenges he had faced. The accusations against him, accusations of manipulating the stock market and misleading the public, were heavy. But they were nothing compared to the doubts he had faced in the past. This trial wasn't the first time he had been tested, and it wouldn't be the last. His eyes shifted toward the judge, Judge Nathaniel Hawke, who was sitting at the bench, reviewing documents and muttering to himself. The disdain on the judge's face was unmistakable. It was clear that Hawke had already made up his mind about Musk. But what Hawke didn't know was that Elon Musk wasn't the same man he had been in his youth. He wasn't the awkward, misunderstood teenager trying to prove his worth. He was a force of nature now, a man who had built an empire from nothing and who had defied every expectation along the way. Elon knew that he had a long road ahead of him in this trial. But he also knew one thing for certain: no matter how many times he had been knocked down, he had always gotten back up. This trial would be no different. The odds might be stacked against him, but Elon Musk had never been one to play by the rules. He had always found a way to turn the tables, and this time, it would be no different. The recess was almost over, and the court would soon reconvene. As Elon stood up and adjusted his suit, a calm determination washed over him. This was just another battle. And he wasn't about to lose. The courtroom door swung open, and the silence that had enveloped the room was broken by the shuffle of feet as everyone returned to their seats. The hum of anticipation was palpable. This was no ordinary trial. It was shaping up to be a battle between a powerful tech mogul and a judge with an axe to grind. Elon Musk knew the stakes, but he also knew the rules of the game. And he had always been a master of bending the rules to his advantage. Judge Hawke slammed his gavel on the wooden bench, signaling the return of order. His eyes immediately found Musk, whose demeanor remained calm, despite the rising tension. The gallery was still buzzing with whispers, reporters poised with their cameras, but Musk seemed unaffected. He had faced much worse than this. "Mr. Musk," Judge Hawk said, his voice cold and calculated, "I hope you're prepared for the real part of this trial. We've heard your defense, and I believe it's time to get down to business." Musk met the judge's gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm ready, Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady, almost too steady for someone who had just been publicly mocked. Hawk's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "Let's see how ready you are." The trial resumed with a slow, methodical pace. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Charlotte Drake, began to present their case. They painted Musk as a manipulative figure, a billionaire whose influence over the stock market had caused untold damage. They argued that his tweets and public statements had misled investors, causing volatility in the market and jeopardizing the livelihoods of countless individuals. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Charlotte's voice rang out across the room, "we are not here to argue about Mr. Musk's genius or his business acumen. We are here to examine his actions and their consequences. This man has used his position of power to deceive the public, and in doing so, he has violated the law." She presented a series of tweets from Musk, each one carefully chosen to showcase his ability to sway the market. The defense team had already been aware of the prosecution's strategy, but hearing the words spoken aloud in the courtroom gave them weight that Musk felt deep in his gut. There was no denying that his words had moved the market. But was it intentional manipulation, or simply the unfiltered musings of a man who had always spoken his mind? On August 7, Charlotte continued, "Mr. Musk tweeted, and I quote, I am considering taking Tesla private at $420. Funding secured." This tweet led to a massive surge in Tesla's stock price. And yet, as we all know, no such deal was ever made. The funding was not secured. The consequences were catastrophic. Investors lost millions. Musk didn't flinch. He'd heard these accusations before. He knew that the tweet in question had been taken out of context. But in the courtroom, it didn't matter. The impact was what the jury would remember. The truth seemed irrelevant in the face of the spectacle. "Your Honor, the facts speak for themselves," Charlotte said, turning her attention to the judge. "Mr. Musk misled investors, and he did so with reckless abandon." Elon's lawyer, Sarah Whitaker, rose to her feet, her expression sharp but composed. "Objection, Your Honor," she interjected. "The prosecution is assuming facts not in evidence. Mr. Musk's tweet was not intended to mislead anyone. It was simply a statement of intent." The judge gave her a brief glance before nodding. "Sustained. But let's move forward. We don't need to dwell on irrelevant details." Charlotte's face tightened in response, but she didn't let it deter her. She moved on to the next point, and soon, the prosecution was detailing other instances in which Musk's actions had allegedly caused harm. They were painting a picture of a man who cared little for the consequences of his words and actions, a man who used his influence to push his own agenda at the expense of others. Throughout the proceedings, Musk sat with his hands folded in front of him, his face a mask of calm. But inside, he could feel the weight of the accusations pressing down on him. This wasn't just about defending his actions, it was about defending everything he had built. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, all of it was at risk if he lost this case. When the prosecution finally finished presenting its opening arguments, Sarah stood to begin the defense's case. Her voice rang with conviction as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "you've heard the prosecution paint a picture of a man who is reckless, manipulative, and careless with the truth. But I'm here to tell you that that is not who Elon Musk is. Yes, he is outspoken. Yes, he is a visionary. But that does not mean he is guilty of the crimes he's been accused of." Sarah turned to face the jury, her eyes sweeping over the faces in the room. "Elon Musk is a man who has revolutionized multiple industries. He's the reason we are talking about electric vehicles in every corner of the world. He's the reason we are discussing the possibility of a human colony on Mars. His innovations have changed the course of history. She paused for effect. But he is also human. And like all of us, he makes mistakes. He's not perfect, but that does not make him a criminal. The defense team began to present evidence that would, they hoped, counter the prosecution's claims. They showed emails between Musk and Tesla executives that demonstrated his commitment to transparency, his intent to find solutions to the challenges facing the company, and his efforts to maintain the integrity of his business. They also presented expert testimony that suggested Musk's statements were often misunderstood or misinterpreted. But the jury wasn't buying it. Their skepticism was evident in their expressions, in the way they whispered to each other. The more Sarah spoke, the more they seemed to doubt her arguments. And in the back of the room, Judge Hawk sat motionless, his eyes fixed on Musk, as if waiting for him to slip up. As the day wore on, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy battle. The prosecution's case was strong, and the jury seemed swayed by the weight of the accusations. Elon could feel the pressure mounting. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everything he had built. When the day's proceedings finally drew to a close, the judge banged his gavel. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. I trust both sides will be ready to continue." Musk stood up, his mind racing. The courtroom was buzzing with conversation as everyone filed out. He could feel the eyes of the media on him, the whispers of the jury behind him. This was only the beginning, and the stakes were higher than ever. But as Elon walked out of the courtroom, he couldn't help but think of one thing: the game was far from over. The following day, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the defense team prepared to unleash their strategy. Elon Musk walked in, looking slightly more confident than the day before, though his expression remained tight with the weight of the case. He was no stranger to pressure, but the stakes had never been higher. The accusations against him were serious, and the jury seemed to be swayed by the prosecution's powerful arguments. Judge Nathaniel Hawk, who had so far been stern and unwavering, seemed to hold an air of satisfaction as he scanned the room. He was enjoying the drama. It was clear that he wanted to see Musk falter, to make an example of him. Musk had faced many critics before, but now the very institution of the law seemed to be aligned against him. And yet, Elon felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, an underlying sense of calm. He wasn't going to lose this battle, not without a fight. In fact, he had something up his sleeve, something that had been carefully prepared for the exact moment when the stakes couldn't be higher. The court session began promptly, and the tension was thick in the air. Charlotte Drake, the assistant district attorney, was the first to speak, addressing the jury with a confidence that came from knowing the strength of her case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Charlotte said, pacing slightly in front of them. "Yesterday, we heard about Mr. Musk's so-called intentions. We heard about how he claims to have simply been thinking aloud. But as I'm sure you can all see, this is a classic case of a man who has used his position of power to influence the stock market in his favor, at the cost of investors and the public." She turned, looking directly at Elon, her eyes cold and calculating. "It's clear that Mr. Musk has become a law unto himself. His words aren't just casual musings, they are weaponized statements, designed to shift the market and deceive those who trust him. His wealth, his power, they have corrupted his sense of accountability." Elon remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. He knew that the prosecution's case was solid, at least on the surface. But he had always known that there was one thing that could turn the tables. One truth that would pull everything into sharp focus. Now it was his turn. His lawyer, Sarah Whitaker, stood up, gathering the jury's attention with a powerful, composed presence. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a knife. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and deliberate. "We've heard a lot about Elon Musk's so-called recklessness and deception. But what we have not heard, what has been conveniently ignored, is the context. The real truth behind the moments in question." She paused, allowing her words to settle. Then, in one swift motion, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a set of documents that she handed over to the judge. The room fell silent, the weight of her gesture heavy. "I'm presenting evidence that, up until now, has been kept from the jury," Sarah continued, her gaze briefly flicking toward Elon before returning to the jury. "The documents before you are communications between Mr. Musk and several high-level Tesla executives, as well as external financial advisors. They reveal that, on the very day he tweeted his infamous funding secured statement, Mr. Musk was in active discussions with potential investors who had expressed strong interest in taking Tesla private. In fact, the discussions were more advanced than the prosecution would have you believe." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury's eyes widened as the revelation sunk in. Charlotte Drake's face tightened with annoyance as she quickly scanned the documents. This was not what she had expected. Elon Musk's tweet wasn't a random, careless outburst, Sarah went on, her voice gaining strength. It was based on real conversations, real plans, and a real intention to move forward with taking Tesla private. He didn't mislead anyone, he was being transparent about his ongoing discussions. In fact, he was trying to avoid the very scenario we find ourselves in today. The defense team began to present more evidence, showing detailed records of the meetings Musk had with potential investors, along with statements from financial experts who testified that the tweet, while unorthodox, was not illegal. They explained that Musk had a reasonable belief that the deal could happen, despite the lack of formal agreement at that point. But the moment that truly changed the tide came when Sarah revealed the final piece of evidence, the smoking gun that would shock the courtroom. Elon Musk did not act alone, Sarah declared, pausing for effect. In fact, the Tesla board was fully aware of his intentions. And here is the crucial part, the board had no objections to his tweet. They supported his transparency, and in fact, they endorsed his approach to communicating the potential deal to the public. She handed over another set of documents, the internal Tesla board meeting minutes, dated just a week before Musk's tweet. The documents showed that several Tesla executives, including the CFO and the head of communications, were not only aware of Musk's discussions but had even provided input on how the announcement should be handled. The board had been informed, and they were fully on board with Musk's idea of announcing the potential privatization publicly. There was a stunned silence in the room as the jury absorbed the information. Charlotte Drake was visibly rattled, flipping through the pages of the new evidence in disbelief. Judge Hawk's face was unreadable. He looked at the documents, then back at Musk, then finally at Sarah. The room was still, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Musk's heart raced, but his face remained calm, his hands folded in front of him. He could feel the momentum shifting in his favor. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the point where everything would change. The masterstroke had been played. Sarah continued, her voice now firm and confident. "What you are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth. Elon Musk did not act in isolation. He was not a man trying to manipulate the market. He was a CEO making decisions in the best interest of his company. Yes, there were missteps, but there was no malice. There was no intention to deceive." The jury, once skeptical, now looked at Elon with new eyes. The tables had turned, and for the first time since the trial began, Musk saw a glimmer of hope in their expressions. But this wasn't over. The prosecution would fight back, and Judge Hawk would not be easily swayed. But Elon knew this battle was far from lost. The war had just begun. The courtroom was buzzing with whispered conversations as the new evidence was passed around. The jury members exchanged glances, some leaning forward, others still processing the weight of the documents Sarah Whitaker had just presented. For the first time in the trial, the momentum was on Musk's side. But he knew it wouldn't last long. The prosecution wouldn't take this blow lying down. Judge Hawk's gavel came down sharply, signaling the end of the morning session. "We will reconvene after lunch," he declared, his voice cold as usual. His eyes flicked briefly to Musk, a barely perceptible nod acknowledging the shift in the case, though he remained uncharacteristically silent. As the courtroom emptied, Musk and his team retreated to their strategy room. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elon knew that the next phase of the trial would be even more critical. The prosecution had just suffered a significant setback, but they would come back with everything they had. This was a battle, and the war wasn't over yet. Sarah Whitaker stood in front of the room, her arms crossed as she stared at the whiteboard filled with notes and diagrams. "We've made progress, but we can't rest. They will come after this new evidence, and they'll do it with everything they've got. They'll attack the credibility of the board, the timeline, and Musk's intentions." Musk sat at the table, running a hand through his hair, trying to clear his mind. The adrenaline from the courtroom still lingered, but it wasn't enough to shake off the underlying worry that nagged at him. He had to win this, not just for himself, but for everyone at Tesla, for the future of his companies, and for the countless people whose lives depended on the success of his vision. "I know," he said, breaking the silence. "But they're missing the bigger picture. They're focusing on the tweet and ignoring the context. If we can just make that clear enough, the jury will understand." Sarah nodded. "The context is key, but they'll argue that the damage was done when the tweet was sent. They'll claim that your words, regardless of the intent, caused irreparable harm. We need to show that your actions were always in line with your long-term vision and that the board had no reason to question you." Elon leaned forward, his mind racing. "We need to find someone who can testify about the long-term strategy. Not just the day-to-day stuff, but the bigger picture, the kind of future I was trying to build with Tesla. That's what will resonate." Just as Sarah was about to respond, the door to the room swung open. A member of Musk's legal team stepped in, holding a phone in his hand. "Mr. Musk, there's something you need to see. It's urgent." Elon stood up and took the phone from the lawyer. His heart sank as he saw the headline on the screen: "Elon Musk faces new allegations of insider trading amidst trial." "Damn it," Elon muttered, his mind racing. "They've found something new. We're back to square one." Sarah's expression darkened. "What does this mean?" The lawyer who had brought the phone into the room stepped forward, explaining that the article claimed that Musk's tweet about taking Tesla private wasn't just an issue of market manipulation, it was now being presented as a case of insider trading. The article detailed how Musk had allegedly provided insider information to potential investors, giving them an unfair advantage in the market before his tweet. Elon cursed under his breath. This was the last thing he needed. Insider trading was a federal offense, and if the prosecution was able to connect him to that accusation, it could mean prison time. His mind spun as the implications of the new allegations hit him full force. "We can't let this become the focus of the trial," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to act fast. If this gets out in full force, we're done." Sarah immediately began working with the team to craft a response, but the feeling of dread lingered. The media was already running wild with the allegations, and it wouldn't be long before the jury was exposed to the new claims. As the afternoon session began, Elon took his seat, the weight of the new accusation hanging over him. He wasn't prepared for this, but he had no choice but to face it head-on. The courtroom was buzzing with an air of anticipation as Charlotte Drake took the floor. The prosecution's strategy had clearly shifted. Instead of focusing solely on the market manipulation aspect, Charlotte now leaned heavily into the insider trading allegations. She began by laying out a new series of events, one that linked Musk's private conversations with investors to the subsequent tweet. According to her, these conversations were evidence that Musk had provided insider information that gave the investors an unfair advantage in purchasing stock before the tweet went public. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Charlotte began, her voice dripping with a newfound sense of triumph. "It's not enough that Mr. Musk misled investors with his tweets. It's not enough that he caused chaos in the market. Now, we know he crossed a line, he used insider information to enrich himself and others. The facts are clear." Musk's stomach churned as Charlotte presented emails and text messages between Musk and several investors. She claimed that these communications, which had occurred in the days leading up to the infamous tweet, contained critical, non-public information about Tesla's future direction and business operations, information that gave these investors a significant advantage in the market. Elon watched, his mind racing, as the evidence piled up. It was clear that this was an attempt to shift the narrative and bring a new, much more dangerous set of charges into the trial. Insider trading wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was a criminal charge, and it had the potential to send him to prison. But just as the tension in the room reached its peak, Sarah stood up to counter the new allegations. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "the prosecution is attempting to create a narrative that simply isn't supported by the evidence. What they are presenting is circumstantial at best. There is no evidence that Mr. Musk engaged in insider trading. In fact, the communications that have been presented were merely part of the ongoing discussions with potential investors, discussions that were based on publicly available information." She paused and turned toward the jury. "Mr. Musk has always operated in the open. His vision has always been about transparency. He did not provide any privileged information that gave anyone an unfair advantage. These claims are an attempt to distract from the real issue, whether Mr. Musk's tweet, taken out of context, constitutes a violation of the law." The jury sat in silence as Sarah continued, her words cutting through the chaos. Musk could feel the weight of the room shift again, but this was a long fight, and they still had much ground to cover. As the judge called for a recess, Elon turned to Sarah, his face drawn with concern. "This is getting out of hand. We need to find a way to shut this down. Fast." Sarah nodded, her eyes steely. "We will. But we need to focus on one thing now, keeping the focus on your intentions, not the accusations. If we do that, we can still win this." Elon nodded. But as he looked around the courtroom, he knew the worst was far from over. The recess between sessions felt like an eternity. Elon paced around the strategy room, his thoughts in overdrive. Every step, every word of his trial could mean the difference between freedom and imprisonment. The new insider trading allegations were a game-changer, and he knew that if they gained enough traction, they could completely overshadow the defense's arguments about intent. He had to do something drastic, and fast, to regain control of the narrative. Sarah Whitaker, his lead attorney, was hunched over a stack of legal documents on the table, her brow furrowed in concentration. The rest of the team was discussing their next moves, some scribbling notes, others trying to figure out a way to rebut the new accusations. The tension in the room was palpable, but Sarah remained calm, her professional demeanor unshaken. "Elon," Sarah called out, looking up from the papers, "I need to ask you something critical. Before we go any further, we need to know, did you ever directly give any investor non-public information about Tesla?" Elon stopped pacing, the question hitting him harder than he anticipated. For a moment, he let the weight of her words sink in. Could there have been a slip? Could one of his conversations have crossed a line he hadn't realized? He replayed the discussions in his mind, he'd always been careful. But careful or not, these were high-stakes discussions, and people could twist anything. "Not intentionally," he said finally, his voice steady but unsure. "I've never given out inside information to any investor. Everything I discussed was about our goals, potential future plans, nothing that wasn't available through public channels or projections." Sarah's gaze softened for a moment before she resumed her serious expression. "All right, then we need to make that clear. If the jury believes you, if they understand that the communications were with investors who were simply exploring opportunities based on public information, we can still turn this around." The clock ticked on, and soon, the courtroom doors swung open, signaling the return of the trial. Elon, Sarah, and the team gathered their things quickly and filed back into the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation as everyone took their seats. Charlotte Drake stood confidently at the prosecution's table, her eyes narrow as she glanced over at the defense. Her team was now armed with fresh ammunition. The insider trading allegations were her ticket to victory. She knew the jury would latch onto these charges. Insider trading had a simplicity to it, a clear violation that most people could understand, and it carried a heavy public perception. If she could make the jury believe that Musk had been complicit, there would be no way back for him. Judge Hawk banged his gavel. The court was back in session. "Proceed with your cross-examination, Ms. Drake," the judge commanded. Charlotte rose from her chair, walking slowly toward the defense table with a quiet, calculated intensity. She turned to the jury, her voice dripping with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte began, "we now know that Mr. Musk not only misled investors with his tweet but actively sought to give them an edge using insider information. He gave privileged knowledge to those investors, which directly affected the market in a way that benefited him personally. This is not a mistake. This is a crime." She paused and turned back to Elon, her eyes piercing through him. "Mr. Musk, in your communications with these investors, you mentioned future plans about Tesla's expansion. Was this information available to the public at the time?" Elon remained still, but the question stung. The whole premise of the trial had changed in the blink of an eye. Now, it wasn't just about a tweet. It was about whether he had crossed the line from business executive to criminal. If the jury believed Charlotte's narrative, his career, and his future, could be over. "No, Ms. Drake," Musk replied, his voice controlled, though his mind raced. "The information I discussed was about general goals, about what Tesla had planned in the future. It was never specific, and it was never non-public in the sense you're implying." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying that your communications with investors were merely discussions about public information? You didn't share anything with them that could have been seen as an unfair advantage?" "Exactly," Elon said firmly. "Everything I said to them was based on public projections or things we were already working on. There was nothing exclusive or insider in those conversations." "Let's look at Exhibit B," Charlotte said, pulling up a document onto the screen that displayed an email exchange between Musk and a major investor. She read the message aloud. "In this email, Mr. Musk states that Tesla will definitely be expanding into international markets by next quarter, information that had not been made public at the time. You would agree that this was confidential, correct?" Musk's face remained stoic, but inside, he could feel the familiar pressure. The key to winning this argument was making it clear that his communication was based on reasonable projections, not insider knowledge. He had to pivot, and fast. "Your Honor," Sarah Whitaker interjected, standing up to address the court. "If I may." The email in question was part of a conversation regarding Tesla's growth plans, which were publicly available projections based on previous filings and press releases. There is no evidence to suggest that the content of that email was confidential or that it provided an unfair advantage to anyone. Sarah turned to the jury, her tone calm and persuasive. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is a basic misunderstanding. Mr. Musk's communications were about publicly available information, projections, market trends, and business strategy. None of these conversations involved insider trading. The prosecution is trying to turn these standard business discussions into something sinister. But there is no crime here." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The jury was listening intently. Elon felt the weight of their eyes on him, and despite the pressure, he remained focused. He could feel the scales of justice slowly tipping in his favor again. Judge Hawk leaned forward, his gaze sharp as he addressed Charlotte. "Ms. Drake, is there any evidence to support the claim that Mr. Musk's communications were anything other than what he described, general discussions based on public knowledge?" Charlotte hesitated, clearly frustrated. "No, Your Honor. But the nature of the statements made to investors implies that they could have used this information to make decisions that influenced their market behavior." "But no one was informed about anything that wasn't already public knowledge," Sarah countered, her voice unwavering. "This is speculation. The prosecution is trying to use it as a way to shift the focus from the actual issue at hand." Judge Hawk nodded, signaling that he understood the argument. The prosecution had failed to present any concrete evidence of insider trading. It had all come down to circumstantial arguments. With that, the session was adjourned for the day. As the courtroom emptied, Elon felt the faintest sense of relief. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had managed to fend off the worst of the accusations for now. As he walked out of the courtroom with Sarah, Elon couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. But as he passed through the doors and into the crowded hallway, a thought gnawed at him. The prosecution wouldn't let this go. They would find something else, something new to attack. And he would have to be ready. The days following the courtroom battle were a blur for Elon Musk. Despite the reprieve he'd earned with the insider trading rebuttal, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the prosecution wasn't done with him. He knew they would regroup, find another angle, and try to push harder, using any new tactic they could. For now, though, there was a slight sense of relief, just enough for Elon to focus on regrouping. Inside his office at Tesla's headquarters, Elon sat across from Sarah Whitaker, looking at the latest documents they had received from the prosecution. Sarah was tapping her pen against the desk, her face a study in concentration. The legal team had worked tirelessly overnight, trying to predict the next move from the other side. And they were right to be concerned. Charlotte Drake wasn't one to back down easily. "I'm not going to lie, Elon," Sarah began, breaking the silence, "they're about to come at you with something else. We've seen the patterns before. They'll find another piece of evidence that supports their case, and they'll twist it to their advantage. It's what they've been doing since day one. But the key right now is to anticipate it before they do." Elon leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation beginning to settle on him again. "What do we do next?" Sarah narrowed her eyes, considering her options. "We need to prepare for their next play. They'll likely come at you with accusations about your behavior as a CEO, suggesting that you're reckless or irresponsible. They'll point to any moment of conflict, any questionable decision-making, and try to paint you as someone who can't be trusted with a company the size of Tesla." Elon knew that was coming. The accusations about him being reckless had been whispered from the very beginning, ever since he made the infamous tweet about taking Tesla private. The prosecution had already used his social media presence to fuel their narrative. Now they were aiming for his leadership style. He exhaled, rubbing his eyes. "This is a circus. They're trying to turn everything into a spectacle." Sarah smiled wryly. "That's the game now. But we can fight back by shifting the narrative. We show the jury who you really are, the decisions you've made that shaped Tesla, the risks you've taken that led to real innovation, and the successes that have been built on those risks. It's all about showing them the bigger picture." "All right," Elon said, standing up. He paced to the window, looking out over the sprawling campus of Tesla. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden light across the factory floor. He could feel the pull of his vision, the desire to make a lasting impact on the world. He couldn't let them tear that down. "We need a strategy. Something to neutralize their attack. Something bold." Sarah watched him closely, knowing that when Elon set his mind to something, there was no stopping him. "What did you have in mind?" Elon turned around, his eyes focused, his determination clear. "I want to take the stand. I need to look the jury in the eye and tell them why I did what I did, why Tesla and SpaceX are more than just companies to me. They're my life's work. If I don't take control of the narrative, they will." Sarah was taken aback. "You want to testify?" Elon nodded. "Yes. I've built these companies from nothing. I've put everything I have into them, and I'm not going to let them twist the story of how I got here. If they're going to attack me, I'll face them head-on." Sarah hesitated. "Taking the stand is a huge risk, Elon. You're putting yourself in the firing line. The prosecution will do everything they can to make you look like a fool, to provoke you into saying something that undermines your defense." Elon's gaze hardened. "I've been in high-pressure situations before. I can handle it. If the jury sees the truth, they'll understand. And if they don't, we're going to lose anyway. But this is my chance to show them what I believe in." Sarah's eyes softened. "I'll support you. We'll make sure you're ready for every question." But you have to be prepared. There's no turning back once you're up there. Elon didn't respond immediately. He was already mentally preparing himself for the challenge. He knew it was risky, but he had never shied away from difficult decisions. The stakes were too high now, and he couldn't afford to remain passive while the prosecution twisted his intentions. That night, Elon barely slept. His mind kept replaying moments from the trial, running through the various angles the prosecution could use to attack him. He had to be prepared for anything. But as the morning of the next session arrived, he felt a quiet sense of resolve. This was his chance to reclaim control. The courtroom was packed again. As Elon and Sarah entered, the usual hum of conversation quieted. The jury was already seated, the gallery full of observers and media. The tension was palpable, everyone eager to see what would happen next. Would Elon take the stand and risk it all? Judge Hawk called the court to order, his voice as stern as ever. We'll continue with the defense's case. Mr. Musk, you may now make your decision. Elon rose from his seat, his heart beating in his chest. This was it. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, the prosecution, the jury, the media, and the spectators. The world was watching. With steady steps, he approached the witness stand. His lawyers gave him one last look of support before he climbed into the chair, the weight of the moment settling over him like a heavy cloak. Charlotte Drake gave him a calculating look from the other side of the room, but she didn't make a move. She knew this could be dangerous for her side. Elon was a master at manipulating public opinion, and his words could make or break the case. Judge Hawk gave a nod of acknowledgement. Mr. Musk, you may proceed with your testimony. Elon adjusted the microphone in front of him, looking at the jury. He took a deep breath, letting the silence settle for a moment before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to thank you for your attention and your patience throughout this trial. I know it's been long and difficult, but I want to tell you why I'm here today. Tesla and SpaceX are not just businesses to me. They are the culmination of a vision, a dream I've had for as long as I can remember. I've always believed that we can change the world, that technology can make people's lives better. His voice carried the weight of conviction. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I didn't make the decisions I made to deceive anyone. I made them to push forward, to make Tesla the company it is today. Sometimes, that means taking risks. It means facing adversity and doing things that others might not understand. But it's all been for a greater purpose, to build a future that's better for all of us. The room was silent, the jury hanging on his every word. Elon continued, his eyes steady. I've never taken anyone's money or misled anyone for personal gain. I've always acted with Tesla's best interests at heart. And if that means making tough decisions, I'll continue to do so. But I need you to understand the bigger picture. What I've done is about innovation. It's about taking risks to create something that will last. For the first time since the trial began, Elon felt a sense of clarity. The battle wasn't just about defending his actions, it was about defending his dream. And he would do whatever it took to make them understand that. The room was silent as Elon Musk took his seat again after delivering his testimony. His words hung in the air, and for the first time during the trial, there was a sense of shift. Perhaps the jury was beginning to see him not as a reckless billionaire, but as a man with a vision. He had always been polarizing, and his unfiltered testimony had struck a chord with some, while others in the room remained skeptical. Elon sat in his seat, his gaze steady but contemplative. For the first time since the trial began, he felt like he had given the jury something real, something more than just legal jargon or strategy. He had shared his truth, and now, there was nothing more to do but wait for the inevitable questioning from the prosecution. Charlotte Drake rose to her feet, and the tension in the air doubled. She had been quiet throughout Elon's testimony, biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to dismantle him. She strode confidently toward the witness stand, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes locked onto Elon's, and it was clear she wasn't about to let him off easy. The room seemed to tense as she began her cross-examination. "Mr. Musk," Charlotte began, her tone sharp, "you've stated that your decisions have always been for the good of Tesla, and you claim that everything you've done has been with the best interests of the company in mind. But let's take a step back for a moment and look at some of your more controversial actions. You've made public statements about taking Tesla private. Can you remind the jury exactly how that unfolded?" Elon swallowed hard. He had been expecting this line of questioning. The infamous tweet, the "funding secured" message that had sparked a storm of controversy. It was the anchor of the prosecution's case. But this was his chance to explain, to clarify. "Yes," Elon replied, his voice steady but measured. "I tweeted about taking Tesla private because I genuinely believed it was the best thing for the company at the time. I had the support from investors, and it was going to allow us to focus on long-term growth without the pressures of the public market. I was acting in the best interest of Tesla." Charlotte didn't flinch, though she knew she had landed on a sensitive issue. "But Mr. Musk, the tweet you sent out was wildly misleading, wasn't it? You claimed that the funding was secured, when in fact, no such agreement had been reached. Isn't that right?" A murmur rippled through the room as Elon's heart rate spiked. He had prepared for this moment, he knew the implications of the tweet, and how it had triggered investigations, stock price fluctuations, and a whirlwind of legal issues. "The tweet was a mistake," Elon said slowly, looking directly at the jury. "It was an overly optimistic statement, and I regret the way it was phrased. But it wasn't meant to deceive anyone. It was a moment of miscommunication, not fraud." Charlotte smirked, as though she had been waiting for that answer. "A mistake, Mr. Musk? You're saying that your statement about securing funding was just a simple mistake? After all the millions of dollars in losses for investors, the SEC investigation, and the public backlash, you're still sticking with that explanation?" Elon's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "I've always been transparent about the mistake. The goal was never to mislead anyone, it was a failure in communication. And as for the losses, I've made it clear that the decision was made with the intent to protect the company, not to benefit personally. Yes, it backfired, and I've accepted responsibility for that. But it wasn't an attempt to deceive anyone." Charlotte paced in front of the jury, shaking her head. "Isn't it convenient, Mr. Musk, that you always seem to find yourself in situations where things go wrong, yet you never take full responsibility? Let's talk about your other actions that have come under scrutiny. Tesla's production delays, the Model 3 struggles, and let's not forget the infamous smoking incident on Joe Rogan's podcast. You don't think that all of this paints a picture of someone who's not quite in control, do you?" Elon's grip on the chair tightened as the prosecutor pressed him. He could feel the room turning against him. He had been through challenges, but now, the stakes had never felt higher. The truth was, Tesla had faced immense pressure, and the risks he had taken had not always gone according to plan. But what Charlotte failed to understand, what many people failed to understand, was that these struggles were all part of the larger journey toward success. "I'll admit that the company has faced challenges," Elon replied, his voice unwavering. "But every decision I made was with the long-term goal of making Tesla successful. I knew the production delays were frustrating, but I knew we'd get through it. The Model 3 was a risk, but it was necessary. As for the podcast incident, look, I'm human. I make mistakes, and I don't claim to be perfect. But I've always owned up to them. My goal has never been to avoid accountability. It's to learn, adapt, and keep pushing forward." Charlotte tilted her head, her lips curling into a smug grin. "Is that what you would call it, Mr. Musk? Pushing forward? Or is it more like dragging others along with you while you keep failing upward? You've caused chaos, you've misled the public, and you've created an unstable environment for Tesla. And yet, you still stand here, defending yourself as if you're some kind of hero." Elon didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "I'm not asking to be a hero. I'm just asking for the truth to be heard. I've always taken risks in the name of progress, in the name of innovation. Not everything works perfectly, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth trying. Tesla is where it is today because we never gave up. Because we kept pushing, even when everyone said it couldn't be done. The room fell silent as Elon's words hung in the air. There was a rawness to his declaration, a genuine passion for what he had built. Charlotte, clearly frustrated, shot one last question at him before returning to her seat. "So, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "you expect the jury to believe that every one of your actions, every one of your decisions, was made with the best interests of Tesla in mind, despite the lies, the chaos, and the fact that you've been under constant scrutiny for years?" Elon took a deep breath before answering, his voice firm. "Yes. I do. Because everything I've done, for better or worse, has been about pushing Tesla and SpaceX forward. I'm not perfect, but I've always acted with a vision for the future." Charlotte, her smile fading, nodded slowly. "I think the jury has heard enough, Your Honor." Judge Hawk looked to the jury. "You may step down, Mr. Musk." Elon stood and walked back to his seat, the weight of the room on his shoulders. His hands were clammy, but his mind was clear. He had spoken the truth, even if it wasn't a pretty one. He had risked everything by taking the stand, but now, it was in the hands of the jury. Would they see the man who had created something extraordinary, or would they buy into the prosecution's narrative of a reckless billionaire? As the days dragged on, the trial reached its critical juncture. Elon Musk had been on the stand, bared his soul to the jury, and fought back against the prosecution's relentless questioning. The stakes had never been higher, but the courtroom remained tense and uncertain. Every move, every word was scrutinized, and the silence in the room felt suffocating. The prosecution had shown their hand, but now, it was Elon's turn to capitalize on the cracks that had begun to show. In the days following his testimony, the defense team had been working non-stop, going through every piece of evidence, analyzing the patterns of the prosecution, and searching for any leverage they could use. Sarah Whitaker was as sharp as ever, constantly pushing Elon to think outside the box. She knew that winning this case would require more than just deflecting attacks, it would require a bold, unexpected move. In the high-rise conference room, Sarah stood by the window overlooking the bustling city below. Elon, sitting at the head of the table, stared at the files spread out before him. His eyes were distant, still processing the weight of the trial and the uncertainty of the outcome. Despite the mounting pressure, a flicker of determination burned behind his eyes. He had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this was different. "Elon, we need to talk about the next step," Sarah said, turning to face him. "Charlotte Drake isn't going to give up easily. We've only scratched the surface of what she's capable of. But I've been thinking, we've been playing defense this whole time. What if we go on the offensive?" Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "Offensive? What do you mean?" "Instead of just countering her arguments, we could turn the tables," Sarah replied. "What if we show the jury something they haven't seen yet? Something that completely undermines their narrative?" Elon sat up straighter. "You're talking about bringing something new to the table? A game changer?" Sarah nodded. "Exactly. We've been so focused on defending your actions that we've ignored something crucial, your leadership and the vision you've built. We've shown Tesla's success in the past, but we haven't connected those dots in a way that really makes the jury see the bigger picture. It's time to shift the focus from the chaos to the results." Elon leaned forward, considering Sarah's suggestion. It made sense. He had spent his entire career proving that big risks led to revolutionary rewards. But the prosecution had done everything they could to portray him as a reckless visionary who hurt others in the process. If he could shift the narrative, focus on the positive impact Tesla had had on the world, it could be the turning point. "What do you have in mind?" Elon asked, his curiosity piqued. Sarah paced around the room, gathering her thoughts. "We could introduce key figures who were there at the beginning, people who understand the magnitude of what you've created. People who can testify not just to the success of Tesla, but to the culture, the mission, and the risks that you took. They've seen your vision firsthand, and they can explain how that vision changed everything. Elon thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. We've been so focused on defense that we've forgotten why I did this in the first place. We need to remind the jury that Tesla's not just a company, it's a movement. I'll bring in the right people. We'll shift the narrative completely. Sarah smiled. That's the kind of move that could change everything. But we'll need to prepare them. They'll have to testify in a way that speaks directly to the heart of your defense, without overplaying it. It needs to come off as genuine, not rehearsed. Let's do it, Elon said firmly. I'm done playing by their rules. It's time for them to see the bigger picture. The next day, Elon met with several key figures from Tesla's early days, people who had been with him since the start. Among them was J.B. Straubel, Tesla's co-founder and the company's chief technology officer for many years. He was one of the people who truly understood Elon's mindset and the risks involved in creating Tesla from the ground up. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Elon, J.B. said as they sat in the conference room, surrounded by piles of paperwork and legal briefs. The prosecution doesn't see the real story. They're so caught up in the missteps that they miss the vision, the risks, the sacrifices, the failures we learned from. We weren't building a car company. We were building a new kind of future. Elon nodded, appreciating JB's understanding. Exactly. We didn't just want to make electric cars. We wanted to change the entire automotive industry. We wanted to show the world that sustainable energy could be more than just an ideal, it could be the foundation for a new way of living. Sarah, who was sitting nearby, added, we need to make sure the jury understands that. They need to hear from people who've been with Elon from the beginning. People who've seen firsthand how much of a gamble it was to make Tesla a reality. After a brief pause, JB spoke again. I think I can help with that. But I'll need to be clear with the jury about what we faced. The financial struggles, the doubts we had in the early days. It wasn't just you taking risks, Elon. We were all in it together. That's exactly what we need, Elon said. We need the jury to see that this wasn't just one person's dream, it was a team effort. And we all knew the risks. As the trial resumed, the defense team was ready. Elon had secured testimony from JB and other key Tesla employees, all of whom were prepared to speak to the vision that had driven Tesla forward, even when the odds seemed impossible. The mood in the courtroom was charged, with the prosecution anticipating another round of cross-examination. Judge Hawk called the proceedings to order, his gavel striking the sound of inevitability. Mr. Musk, we will now hear from your witnesses, the judge said. Elon stood, his face calm but determined. This was his chance to show the jury the truth behind Tesla's journey. It wasn't just about stock prices, tweets, or courtrooms. It was about a bold vision that had changed the world. J.B. Straubel was the first to take the stand. His presence in the courtroom was understated, yet his testimony would be anything but. He recounted the early days of Tesla, the struggles, and the sacrifices they all made to bring the dream to life. The jury listened intently, captivated by his first-hand account of the challenges they had faced together. The idea of building electric cars from scratch was absurd, JB said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We were told it couldn't be done. But Elon believed in it. He didn't just see a car, he saw an opportunity to change the world. It wasn't easy. We faced financial collapse, technical failures, and countless moments when we thought we were done. But we never gave up. And that's why Tesla is where it is today. Elon's heart swelled with pride as JB spoke. This was the story he had lived, the one that had driven him to continue, even when every logical part of him told him to stop. He knew this was the moment to remind the jury of the bigger vision, the one that had guided everything he did. The momentum had shifted, but the battle was far from over. Elon Musk had made his move, bringing in key figures from Tesla's early days to highlight the collaborative effort and visionary drive that had shaped the company's success. The defense was now armed with a compelling narrative, one that portrayed the risks, struggles, and ultimate triumph of their endeavors. But the prosecution was still reeling, and Charlotte Drake wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial entered its most intense phase. The jury, which had been absorbing the testimony carefully, was now grappling with the complexity of the case. The stakes were clear. The defense had made a strong case for the long-term vision behind Elon Musk's leadership, but would that be enough to overcome the deep skepticism about his actions, specifically his tweet that had triggered so much controversy? Elon sat in his seat, arms crossed, his eyes focused but thoughtful. Sarah Whitaker, his lead attorney, stood beside him, looking more confident than she had in days. There was a sense that they had finally regained control of the narrative, but the prosecution was not finished yet. Charlotte Drake had a reputation for being relentless, and Elon knew she would come out swinging. It was the following day that Charlotte made her move. She had spent the night preparing for this moment, gathering new evidence, analyzing the defense's witnesses, and readying her cross-examination. As the courtroom settled into a tense silence, Charlotte stood and approached the podium, her gaze never leaving Elon. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice smooth and calculating, "you've brought in witnesses to paint a picture of a visionary who dared to dream big. But I think it's important to remember that this trial isn't about dreams. It's about reality. It's about facts. And the facts are clear. Your tweet was not just an unfortunate mistake. It was an attempt to manipulate the market and mislead your investors." The words hung in the air like a shot across the bow. Elon could feel the tension build again in the room as Charlotte continued her assault. "You've admitted that you were aware of the risks when you sent that tweet, Mr. Musk," she said, pacing in front of the jury, her tone growing sharper. "You knew that by saying you had secured funding, you were giving investors the impression that a deal was in place, when in fact no such deal existed. You knew that this would affect Tesla's stock price, didn't you?" Elon sat up straighter in his chair, preparing himself for the next round of questioning. He had been here before, and he had answered these questions. But Charlotte's ability to twist the facts made it clear that this was far from over. "I knew that my tweet was overly optimistic," Elon replied, his voice steady. "But I also knew that I was in talks with potential investors, and I believed we were on the verge of securing funding. It was a misjudgment in phrasing, not an attempt to deceive anyone." Charlotte scoffed. "Misjudgment? You weren't just making a small mistake, Mr. Musk. You made a statement that caused millions of dollars in losses for investors. You can't just brush that off as an optimistic comment. That tweet had real-world consequences." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and Elon could sense that the jury was starting to feel the weight of Charlotte's argument. It was always the hardest part, when the prosecution presented the facts in a way that made them seem undeniable. But Elon was no stranger to being misunderstood, and he wasn't about to let his story be told through half-truths. "I understand the consequences of my actions," Elon said, looking directly at the jury. "But those consequences were not my intent. The truth is, I was focused on the future of Tesla, and I believed that taking the company private would allow us to focus on long-term growth." The statement was poorly worded, but it wasn't intended to deceive anyone. Charlotte shot a pointed look at the jury. "You keep saying it wasn't your intent. But that doesn't change the fact that it misled the public, and more importantly, it manipulated the stock price. Isn't it true, Mr. Musk, that you've made these kinds of reckless decisions time and time again, all while putting your personal interests before the interests of your investors?" There was a pause as the question hung in the air, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Elon didn't flinch. He knew where Charlotte was trying to go with this, and he was prepared for it. "Let me make something clear," Elon said, his voice growing more resolute. "I didn't start Tesla for personal gain. I started it because I believed in a future where we didn't have to rely on fossil fuels. I put my money and my reputation on the line, not because I wanted to make a quick profit, but because I wanted to make a difference. Every decision I've made, every risk I've taken, has been in service of that goal." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, and she leaned in slightly, as if savoring the moment. "But what about your history, Mr. Musk? Let's talk about the other incidents that show a pattern of irresponsible behavior. The SEC lawsuit, the countless controversies surrounding your public statements and actions. Don't you see how this creates a dangerous precedent for the kind of power you wield?" Elon took a deep breath, his fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the table. It was clear that Charlotte was trying to break him, to get him to doubt his own motivations. But Elon had faced critics all his life, from the moment he dropped out of Stanford to start Zip2 to the moment Tesla nearly went bankrupt. "Look," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But the difference is that I've always learned from them. Tesla wouldn't be here today if I hadn't kept going, kept fighting for the future I believed in. And no amount of mistakes, no matter how public, will change that vision." The room was silent for a moment as Charlotte processed his words. For the first time in this cross-examination, she seemed to falter. But she quickly regained her composure, shifting her strategy. "You claim that your vision was pure, Mr. Musk," she said coolly, "but at the end of the day, this is about accountability. You made the decision to go public with a statement that you knew would have consequences, and now, you have to face those consequences." Elon's expression softened, and he turned to look at the jury. "I've always been accountable for my actions. I've faced the consequences of my decisions. But I've also taken responsibility for my mistakes. That's how you grow. That's how you make progress. And that's why I'm here today, not just as the CEO of Tesla, but as someone who refuses to let failure stop them." Charlotte hesitated for a split second, but she quickly moved in for the kill. "Is that your defense, Mr. Musk? That failure is just part of the process? You put your company and your investors at risk, and now, you expect us to simply accept your excuses?" Elon met her gaze without flinching. "It's not an excuse," he replied firmly. "It's the truth. And I believe the jury will understand that." The courtroom held its breath as Judge Hawk called for a short recess. The tension in the room was palpable as both sides prepared for what was sure to be a dramatic conclusion to the trial. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable as the recess came to an end. Elon Musk had held his ground against Charlotte Drake's withering cross-examination, but he knew the battle wasn't over. He had answered questions, but there were still cracks in the defense that needed to be filled. He had presented his vision, but now, it was time to show the jury something that would make them question everything they had heard up until that point. As the judge returned to the bench, the room fell silent. Judge Hawk's gavel struck with authority, signaling the continuation of the trial. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice unwavering. Elon sat back in his chair, his mind whirring with thoughts. Sarah Whitaker, his brilliant attorney, sat beside him. Her expression was focused, but Elon could tell she was bracing herself for the next wave. The defense had its back against the wall, and Charlotte had succeeded in placing significant pressure on Elon. But Sarah had a plan that would shake the entire courtroom. The prosecution had made its case. They had painted Elon as reckless, irresponsible, and willing to put his investors at risk for personal gain. But what they hadn't anticipated was that Elon wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for the truth. And sometimes, the truth needed to be unleashed in a way that no one could see coming. "Elon," Sarah whispered as the court settled, "it's time. Are you ready?" Elon looked at her, his gaze steady. "Let's do it." Charlotte had made her case, and now it was time for Sarah to deliver the knockout punch. With a determined look, she stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident, "up until now, we've heard a lot about intentions and consequences, about tweets and risks. But what hasn't been fully explored is the broader context of Mr. Musk's actions, specifically, his commitment to Tesla's long-term vision. Today, I will show you that Mr. Musk's actions were not reckless, but strategic, driven by a profound belief in the future. The jury leaned in, sensing a shift in the air. Charlotte Drake raised an eyebrow, but Sarah wasn't fazed. We've already seen that Mr. Musk made a statement about securing funding, a statement that in hindsight, he admits was poorly worded, Sarah continued. But that's not the full picture. What if I told you that Elon Musk's statement was actually part of a much larger, more deliberate plan? A plan that could have fundamentally changed the trajectory of Tesla, and by extension, the entire auto industry? The room went silent, the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air. Charlotte opened her mouth to interject, but Sarah held up a hand, signaling that she wasn't done. You see, while the prosecution has focused on the negative consequences of that tweet, they've ignored one crucial detail: what happened right after, Sarah said, her voice now rising in intensity. What happened after Mr. Musk made that statement was the beginning of something monumental. And today, I'm going to show you that this wasn't just a case of a man speaking too boldly. It was a case of a visionary pushing for something bigger than himself. Sarah turned to Elon, who was sitting quietly, his face a mask of calm determination. Mr. Musk, could you please tell the court about your discussions with key investors at the time of the tweet? Elon stood up, his presence commanding. He looked directly at the jury, his eyes reflecting the weight of the decision before him. At the time of the tweet, I was in advanced discussions with a number of potential investors, Elon began, his voice steady but resolute. These were investors who understood the long-term vision of Tesla and were prepared to take a risk alongside us. What I said in the tweet was part of an ongoing negotiation process. I believed, with conviction, that Tesla could become a privately held company, free from the pressure of quarterly earnings reports, allowing us to focus on our mission of advancing sustainable energy. It was a bold statement, but it was based on real discussions with real investors. The jury was captivated. They could see the conviction in Elon's eyes. This wasn't a man who had made a reckless mistake, it was a man who had taken a calculated risk in the face of adversity. But it wasn't enough just to take his word for it. Sarah nodded, signaling to the court to bring in the next witness. The doors to the courtroom opened, and in walked a figure who had been conspicuously absent throughout the trial, one of the potential investors Elon had been in talks with during the time of the tweet. The man was tall, well-dressed, and exuded an air of calm authority. He was a respected figure in the business world, and the courtroom buzzed with recognition. He introduced himself as Richard Howard, a venture capitalist who had been in talks with Elon about a potential buyout of Tesla. Richard Howard took the stand, and Sarah approached him with a measured pace. Mr. Howard, Sarah began, you were in discussions with Mr. Musk around the time of the now famous tweet, correct? Richard nodded. That's correct. We were in advanced discussions about the possibility of taking Tesla private. Elon and I had been talking about it for several months. It was a big move, one that could fundamentally change the company and the industry, but we were committed to making it happen. Sarah turned to the jury, her eyes scanning the room. You hear that? These weren't empty promises. Elon Musk wasn't speaking out of turn. He was speaking from a place of genuine belief and ongoing negotiations. Richard, can you tell us what your role was in these discussions? Richard's voice was calm as he responded. I was one of the investors who was prepared to help fund the deal. We were in talks with other investors, and we had begun to outline the framework for a buyout. The discussions were in the early stages, but we were moving toward making it happen. The idea was to give Tesla the space to grow without the pressures of the public market. The room was silent as the jury absorbed this new information. Charlotte Drake, for the first time, appeared somewhat rattled. She had built her case around the assumption that Elon's tweet was entirely misleading, but now there was evidence suggesting that Elon had been truthful, or at the very least, had genuine intentions when making the statement. Sarah took a step back, allowing the weight of Richard's testimony to sink in. Then she turned to Elon. Elon, when you made that tweet, was it your belief that Tesla was on the verge of securing the necessary funding to make it a privately held company? Elon nodded. Yes. I believed we were close, and I was hopeful that the funding would come through. I wanted to make sure that Tesla could continue to innovate and stay true to its mission, without the distractions of being a publicly traded company. It was a risk, but it was one I believed was worth taking. There was a palpable shift in the room. The jury seemed to take a collective breath, and even Charlotte Drake had to pause before responding. The courtroom remained eerily still as Richard Howard's testimony hung in the air. It was a moment of reckoning, one that had completely shifted the dynamics of the trial. Elon's defenders had managed to counter the prosecution's narrative that Elon Musk's tweet was a deliberate attempt to deceive the public. They had proven that Elon's statements were based on ongoing, legitimate discussions. But now, the true test was just beginning. It was no longer just about the facts, it was about trust. Elon knew that this moment was critical. The jury was not just listening to the facts, they were deciding whether or not they believed him. Could they trust that his intentions were pure? Could they see past the noise of the media, the public controversies, and the scrutiny he faced daily, to understand his motivations? As Sarah Whitaker prepared for the next round of her strategy, Elon felt the weight of the moment. His mind wandered for a second to the early days of Tesla, when he had spent countless hours working with a small group of engineers and visionaries to build something they all believed in. It had never been easy, there had been days when failure seemed imminent, when the very existence of Tesla was uncertain. But now, standing in front of a jury, he felt that same sense of determination that had gotten him this far. This wasn't just about his reputation. It was about Tesla's future, and the impact it could have on the world. Sarah turned to Elon and gave him a reassuring nod, as if to remind him that he wasn't alone in this. Elon returned her nod, a quiet acknowledgement that they had come a long way together. It was now time to finish what they had started. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sarah began, her voice strong and unwavering, we've seen the prosecution's argument. We've heard the accusations. But we've also heard the truth. Mr. Musk was not acting out of malice. He was not seeking to manipulate the market or deceive investors. He was seeking to protect the long-term future of Tesla, a company that has changed the world. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The jury's eyes followed her every movement, their expressions solemn. This was a pivotal moment. Sarah knew she had to hit home with her closing argument. We've presented evidence that Mr. Musk's tweet was part of a larger, ongoing effort to secure funding and take Tesla private, she continued. And yet, despite the clarity of his intentions, we've been made to feel as though he is a villain, a man who only cares about his personal interests. I ask you to consider this, Mr. Musk is a visionary. He is not perfect, but his mistakes are born from the same drive that created one of the most innovative companies in history. Tesla has saved millions of lives by advancing sustainable energy. Tesla has created thousands of jobs and has provided a roadmap for the future of transportation. That is the legacy Mr. Musk is working toward. That is the man in front of you today. Sarah looked directly at the jury, her gaze unwavering. I ask you to look beyond the headlines, beyond the public image of a tech billionaire that the media has painted for you. I ask you to see the truth of who Elon Musk is. He is a man who believes in the future, who believes that a better world is possible, and who is willing to take risks, face challenges, and even make mistakes, in pursuit of that future. There was a moment of silence in the courtroom, a moment of reflection. The jury members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Sarah had made her case. She had tied Elon's actions to his core mission, his unwavering belief in Tesla's potential to change the world. Elon watched Sarah, a sense of pride swelling within him. He knew how hard this had been for her, for all of them. The pressure they had been under to win this trial was immense. But she had fought every inch of the way. He was grateful for her leadership. But now, it was time to take the final step. The prosecution had their chance, and Charlotte Drake was preparing her final rebuttal. Elon could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't about to let go of this case without a fight. He could feel her presence as she stood, rising to face the jury with one last chance to make her mark. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte began, her voice sharp, "we've heard the defense's argument, and it's clear that they are asking you to overlook one simple fact. The truth. Mr. Musk may have had good intentions, but intentions don't matter when the consequences are this severe. His tweet wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated move to manipulate the market, to get people to buy into the false narrative he was selling." The courtroom was still as Charlotte continued, her words cutting through the tension. "Mr. Musk is a man who thrives on being the center of attention. His entire career has been about grand statements, bold promises, and even bigger actions. But where does that leave the people who believed in him? Where does that leave the investors who trusted him, only to be misled by his impulsive, reckless behavior? This trial is not about a man with a vision. It's about accountability. And Mr. Musk must be held accountable for the consequences of his actions." There it was. The prosecution had built its case around one central theme, that Elon Musk's actions had been reckless, that his tweet had caused harm, and that he needed to pay for the damage he had caused. The courtroom was charged with the weight of Charlotte's words. But Sarah Whitaker wasn't done yet. She stood up again, signaling to the judge. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court," she said, "I would like to present one final piece of evidence. We believe that this will give the jury the final piece of the puzzle they need to understand the truth of Mr. Musk's intentions." Judge Hawk nodded, signaling for Sarah to proceed. A video screen flickered to life, and the courtroom quieted as everyone turned their attention to the screen. It was a recording from a few months before the tweet, Elon Musk speaking at a Tesla shareholder meeting. His words were clear, his message unmistakable. "I've always said that Tesla is about more than just making cars," Elon's voice echoed through the room. "It's about changing the world, creating a sustainable future. And yes, it's a risk. But without risk, there is no reward. We are at the forefront of something that will shape the world for generations to come. And if that means taking the bold step of going private, then we'll do it. We'll do whatever it takes to make sure Tesla stays true to its mission." The screen faded to black. Elon stood tall, his eyes focused on the jury. "That's who I am. That's what I've always believed. That's why I took the risks. That's why I made the tweet. Not because I wanted to manipulate anyone, but because I wanted to secure Tesla's future." There was no more doubt in the room. Elon had spoken. And now, it was up to the jury. The days that followed Sarah Whitaker's closing argument were an agonizing blur of anticipation. Elon sat at the defense table, surrounded by his legal team, but his mind was elsewhere, somewhere far beyond the courtroom. The weight of the trial, the stakes involved, the endless hours of preparation, it all seemed like a distant echo now. The only thing that mattered was the jury's decision. Each day, they filed in, sat down, and listened. And each day, Elon felt a little more like a spectator in his own life. It had been a grueling battle. The prosecution had hammered him relentlessly, painting him as a reckless billionaire who used his position to manipulate the market for personal gain. The defense, on the other hand, had worked tirelessly to show that his actions, while imperfect, were born of a vision far larger than his own ego. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was whether or not the jury had been swayed by the evidence, by the closing statements, by the heart of Elon's story, the story of a man who had fought against all odds to turn an idea into something world-changing. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. It felt like an eternity. Elon couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. All he could do was replay moments from the trial in his mind, the flash of Richard Howard's testimony, Sarah's fiery closing argument, the look in the jury's eyes when Elon himself had spoken. Had they believed him? Had they seen the truth? Finally, the courtroom doors opened. The air was thick with tension as the judge entered, followed by the bailiff carrying the final decision. Judge Hawk's face was unreadable as he took his seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge began, his voice steady, "you have deliberated, and I now ask you to render your verdict." The foreperson of the jury stood up, a thick silence descending over the room. Elon's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a deafening drum. He could feel Sarah's hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. "Your Honor," the foreperson said, her voice clear but strained, "we, the jury, have reached a verdict." Elon's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment that would change everything. The jury foreperson looked directly at Judge Hawk, then at Elon, then at the gallery, and finally, she spoke the words that would determine his fate. "We find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty on all counts." For a split second, the world around Elon seemed to stop. The air in the courtroom shifted, a collective exhale from the people who had been holding their breath for what felt like an eternity. His team erupted into quiet cheers, exchanging looks of relief and triumph. Sarah's eyes softened as she turned to Elon, a smile tugging at her lips. But for Elon, time seemed to slow. The words felt surreal, as if they were coming from someone else. He'd won. He was free. His gaze shifted to the jury. They looked back at him with a mix of understanding and empathy. They had seen something in him. Something that transcended the media frenzy and the pressure of the courtroom. Something they believed in. Judge Hawk nodded, his expression stern but respectful. "The jury has rendered its verdict. Mr. Musk, you are free to go. This court is adjourned." Elon stood up slowly, his legs shaking slightly as the magnitude of the decision began to sink in. The weight that had been pressing down on him for so long was finally lifting, but he wasn't sure how to feel. A part of him wanted to jump out of his seat and shout with joy. Another part of him simply felt numb. This wasn't just a victory, it was a profound moment of reckoning. Sarah was at his side in an instant, her arms around him in a brief but meaningful embrace. "We did it," she whispered, her voice a mix of exhaustion and elation. Elon nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The media representatives in the back of the courtroom were already preparing to rush forward, eager to grab the first comment. He could already feel the cameras, the microphones, the weight of the world descending on him once more. It was the price of fame, of fortune, of being in the spotlight. But for now, he allowed himself a small moment of peace. He wasn't going to let the noise drown out this victory. This was his chance to show the world that he wasn't just a businessman or a billionaire, he was a man who had risked everything for something he believed in. And now, his mission could continue. The press immediately surged toward him, their questions flying. But Elon didn't let the chaos overwhelm him. He turned to Sarah, his voice calm but resolute. "Let's get out of here." Together, they left the courtroom. As they walked out the doors, the weight of the moment finally hit him. He could feel the sun on his face as they exited the building. The day was bright, and the world, it seemed, was still turning. It was over. But Elon knew that this trial was just one chapter in a much larger story. The days after the verdict passed in his favor were a whirlwind for Elon Musk. The media storm had only intensified. Every major news outlet was clamoring for interviews, eager to hear Elon's thoughts now that the trial was over. But Elon, ever the strategist, had other plans. He wasn't interested in reliving the trial for the cameras. In fact, he didn't want to dwell on what had happened at all. The verdict had given him the opportunity to move forward, to refocus on what he loved, innovation, progress, and the future. It was time to return to Tesla and SpaceX, to dive back into the work that had always driven him. Yet, as the days wore on, the pressure to address the public's questions, the media's speculations, and the commentary from experts on the trial continued to mount. The world expected closure, a statement, an apology, or at least a reflection on the ordeal. But Elon, despite the victory, found himself distancing from all of it. The trial had proven one thing above all else: people didn't really care about the facts. They cared about the narrative. Elon knew how the media worked. The story had already been written in their minds long before the jury made their decision. The headlines had been written: Elon Musk cleared of charges in major court victory, and tech billionaire's legal battle ends in victory, but what's next? The media narrative would follow its own path, irrespective of the facts. That morning, Elon decided to take control of the narrative in his own way. He stepped out onto the balcony of his home in Los Angeles, watching as the sun began to rise over the Pacific. The city was already alive with activity, but there was something about the quiet calm of the early morning that gave him clarity. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment to think without the noise of the courtroom or the media. He pulled out his phone, tapping out a quick tweet, something that would shift the conversation away from the courtroom and back to his vision. The real work begins now. The future of sustainable energy and space exploration awaits. #Tesla #SpaceX. It was short, to the point, and it made it clear where his focus lay. He didn't need to explain himself further. He didn't need to go into the specifics of the trial. The world already knew what he stood for: innovation, sustainability, and progress. Within minutes, the tweet was viral, with thousands of retweets and likes pouring in. People responded with messages of support, many praising Elon for not letting the trial distract him from his ultimate goals. Sarah Whitaker, still riding the high of the trial's outcome, called him later that afternoon. "Nice tweet," she said, her voice warm with approval. "You didn't waste any time making sure everyone knew you weren't going to get bogged down by this." Elon chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "I can't afford to. There's too much at stake. I need to keep my focus." Sarah paused for a moment. "I get it, Elon. But don't forget that it's okay to take a breather. You've just won a battle that could have had a huge impact on your companies. You're allowed to acknowledge that." Elon nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He knew she was right. The trial had been a massive distraction, but it had also shown him something important: his ability to weather storms, his resilience in the face of uncertainty. It had reminded him why he had started all of this in the first place: to change the world, to build something that could last. "I'll take it easy for a day or two," he promised, "but then it's back to work. Tesla's future, SpaceX's future, there's no time to waste." Sarah laughed. "Of course. But don't push yourself too hard. You've earned the right to a bit of downtime." After the call, Elon walked to his desk, still reflecting on what Sarah had said. Despite the victory, a part of him felt something he hadn't felt in years: exhaustion. The trial had taken its toll, and although it had ended in his favor, the emotional strain had been far greater than he had anticipated. It wasn't just the legal battle. It was the constant pressure to prove himself to the world, to meet everyone's expectations. And despite the outcome, the doubts would never truly disappear. He looked over at the calendar on his desk. There were endless meetings, presentations, and deadlines waiting for him. The relentless pace of his life wasn't going to slow down. It couldn't. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. The following weeks were a blur of interviews and press conferences. Elon, always aware of the public's insatiable appetite for headlines, decided to meet the media halfway. He would answer questions, give interviews, but he would do it on his own terms. The first major interview he agreed to was with the New York Times. The reporter, a seasoned journalist named David Abrams, had spent years covering the tech industry and had been highly critical of Elon in the past. Elon knew this interview would be a test, an opportunity to change the conversation about him. They met in a sleek conference room at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto. The room was filled with sunlight, the glass walls offering a view of the sprawling campus below. Abrams started with the usual questions about the trial: what it had meant to Elon, whether he regretted anything, and how he felt about the public's reaction. Elon, calm and composed, answered each question succinctly but without giving much away. He talked about the importance of taking risks, of doing what was necessary for the long-term success of Tesla, even if it meant facing public scrutiny. Then, Abrams shifted gears. "What's next for you, Elon?" he asked. "You fought this legal battle and won. But there's still a sense, among some, that your business practices could be questioned. What will it take for you to fully move past this?" Elon didn't flinch. He knew this question was coming. "The truth is, David," he said, his voice steady, "the world is changing, and we're changing with it. I've never been in this for the fame or the fortune. I've always been in this for the mission, to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, to make life multiplanetary. That's what drives me. And that's where I'm focused now. The rest will follow." Abrams leaned forward, sensing the sincerity in Elon's words. "Does that mean you're not concerned about the public perception of you anymore?" Abrams pressed. Elon smiled, a slight, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. "Perception is important, sure. But I've learned that it doesn't matter if people believe in me. What matters is that I believe in what I'm doing. And as long as I do that, I'll keep pushing forward. Because at the end of the day, what's important is the work we do, the world-changing work." With the media circus slowly beginning to fade into the background, Elon Musk found himself back in his element, at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, surrounded by engineers and innovators working tirelessly toward the future. But even as he immersed himself in the day-to-day operations of his companies, something was different. The trial had left its mark on him. He was more cautious, more aware of the forces that surrounded him, forces that seemed to have the power to shape or destroy his legacy at a moment's notice. He sat at his desk in his office at Tesla, staring at the massive screen in front of him. On it, the latest projections for Tesla's upcoming vehicle models scrolled past. Solar roof installations were on track to exceed expectations, but the pressure to meet deadlines on all fronts was higher than ever. But Elon wasn't looking at the numbers on the screen. His mind was elsewhere, specifically, in the upcoming SpaceX launch. SpaceX had made great strides over the years, but Elon knew that the stakes for their next mission were immense. The world had high expectations. The mission was to be the first manned mission to Mars, a bold, audacious goal that seemed impossible to many. But not to Elon. He'd always believed that humanity's future was off Earth. The question had never been if, but when. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced around the room, his mind racing with the logistics of the Mars mission, the safety protocols, and the complex technology that had to be perfected. There were risks, of course, there always were, but that was the price of progress. As he walked out of his office, he was greeted by his team, who had gathered in the main conference room. They were deep into discussions about the spacecraft's design, the latest iteration of the Starship. But Elon wasn't focused on that right now. He was thinking about the next step, something bigger, something that would capture the world's attention and change the course of history. When he entered the room, all eyes turned to him. His senior engineers, SpaceX leaders, and even some of the top scientists he'd brought on board were waiting for him to speak. The air was tense, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. "All right, team," Elon said, his voice low but determined. "It's time to push the envelope further. The Mars mission is only the beginning. I want to start planning for something bigger, something beyond Mars." The room fell silent. One of the engineers, Matt, spoke up. "You mean like, beyond Mars? We've talked about that before, Elon, but..." Elon raised a hand, cutting him off. "Yes, Matt. Beyond Mars. I'm talking about the next frontier. We've spent decades planning for a manned mission to Mars, and now we need to think bigger. I want to start looking at the possibility of interstellar travel." The room was silent for a moment, and then a ripple of murmurs spread through the team. Elon's words weren't just ambitious, they were borderline insane. Interstellar travel? The thought was almost laughable to most, even in the most forward-thinking circles. But Elon had never been one to let convention dictate his thinking. I know it sounds crazy, Elon continued, pacing in front of the group, but if we don't think about what comes next, we'll be left behind. Space exploration isn't just about Mars, it's about the future of humanity. And if we don't start looking at how we can reach other star systems, Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, we risk becoming a species stuck on one planet. We have to think ahead. We have to think about the next steps for humanity's survival. Elon's eyes locked onto each person in the room. He could see the doubt in some of their expressions, but he also saw that spark of curiosity, the same spark that had driven his past successes. Start the research, Elon said, his voice firm. We're not just going to be the first to Mars. We're going to be the first to reach other star systems. This is the future. We're not waiting for someone else to take that step. It starts with us. The engineers exchanged uncertain looks but nodded. It wasn't the first time Elon had made an impossible request. They had come to expect the extraordinary from him, even if they didn't always know how he planned to get there. As they dispersed to begin the initial stages of research, Elon remained in the room, staring out the window. His mind was already moving ahead, beyond Earth, beyond Mars. He was already visualizing the spacecraft, the propulsion systems, the potential breakthroughs that would be required to achieve interstellar travel. It wasn't just a matter of engineering, it was about the human spirit. The need to explore, to push boundaries, to conquer the unknown. And it was something that had always driven Elon. But even as his mind raced forward, a nagging thought lingered. What if this idea, the one he was so passionate about, was too much, even for him? Later that evening, after hours of work on his own, Elon was at home when his phone rang. It was a private number. A number he recognized but didn't expect to hear from at this time. He picked up the phone, his mind still racing with thoughts of the interstellar project. Elon, the voice on the other end said. It was Sarah Whitaker. Elon, we need to talk. Elon paused for a moment, sensing the gravity in her tone. What's going on? I've been doing some digging, she began. You remember Richard Howard, right? The prosecutor? Elon frowned, confused. What about him? He's not done yet, Sarah said, her voice laced with concern. He's already talking to some of your competitors. There's a new investigation coming. He's not going to let this go. Elon's mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Howard? After everything that had happened, wasn't this supposed to be over? Elon thought he had put it all behind him. Elon, this could be more serious than you think, Sarah continued. We've fought hard, but there are whispers that this might be just the beginning. Someone in your circle is feeding them information. The words hit Elon like a ton of bricks. Was someone betraying him? Had all the progress he had made in clearing his name been in vain? I'll handle it, he said, though his mind was already turning over the implications. The last thing he needed now was another legal nightmare. As he ended the call, Elon felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The fight for the future, for interstellar travel, was already immense. But this new threat, this shadow of betrayal, was something he hadn't expected. For once, Elon Musk found himself facing a challenge that wasn't just about technology. It was about trust. And that was a much harder battle to win. The news from Sarah weighed heavily on Elon's mind, and he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things were far from over. The victory in the courtroom felt hollow now. Despite the clear legal win, it seemed like forces beyond his control were conspiring to keep him on the defensive. The question of betrayal within his ranks haunted him. Who could it be? Who was feeding Richard Howard, his former adversary, the information that could undermine everything he had worked for? Elon wasn't used to feeling vulnerable. For most of his life, he had been the one to take risks, the one who forged ahead, always in control of the narrative. But now, for the first time in years, he felt the walls closing in. He sat in his sleek, minimalist office at SpaceX headquarters, his fingers drumming restlessly on the surface of his desk. The engineers had already begun brainstorming the steps toward interstellar travel, but it was hard for Elon to focus on the grand vision when the uncertainty surrounding his company's security lingered in the air. His phone buzzed with a new notification. It was an encrypted message from Sarah. "We need to talk in person. Meet me at the usual place. I'll be there at 7. Elon didn't hesitate. He quickly tapped out a reply, confirming the meeting, and then turned his attention back to the complex data on the Mars mission. But his mind kept drifting back to the threat. If Sarah was asking to meet face-to-face, it meant something serious was about to happen. Something that couldn't be handled over a secure line. The usual place was a small, unassuming cafe in a quiet part of Palo Alto, away from the media glare and prying eyes. It was a location where they had met countless times before, whenever the weight of their responsibilities became too much to bear and they needed to speak freely. Elon arrived early, settling into a corner booth near the back. His mind raced through possible scenarios, wondering what kind of information Sarah had uncovered. The truth was, no matter how much he prided himself on his ability to predict the future, he had no idea who could be behind this betrayal. When Sarah finally walked in, Elon stood up immediately. She looked tired, worn down by the same stress that had consumed him for the past few weeks. But there was also determination in her eyes, a fire that told him she wasn't backing down. "Sit down," she said, motioning for Elon to take his seat again. "I have something to show you." She placed a manila envelope on the table between them and slid it over. Elon opened it carefully, pulling out a series of documents and photographs. "These were taken from Howard's office," she said, watching him closely. "I had a trusted contact get them for me. And I think you'll find them interesting." The documents contained internal communications from some of the major players in the tech industry, people Elon knew well, people who were well-positioned to undermine his business. Among them was a series of memos and emails detailing meetings between Richard Howard and several prominent figures, discussing the ongoing investigation into Elon and his companies. Some of the names were familiar, some were new, but one thing became painfully clear. "This isn't just a legal matter," Elon muttered under his breath. "It's corporate warfare." Sarah nodded grimly. "Exactly. There are people in your industry who want to see you fall. They don't care about the truth, they just want to take you down, no matter what the cost." Elon felt a surge of anger building within him. It wasn't just the legal system that he had to fight anymore. It was an entire network of people who viewed him as a threat to their own success. They weren't going to let him just keep pushing the boundaries of technology and space exploration without trying to tear him down. "These people have been actively undermining your companies," Sarah continued, her voice low. "And they've been feeding Howard information that, if it had been made public, could have ruined you. But we have one thing they don't, the truth. And we're going to use it." Elon's mind was already calculating the next steps. He knew that he had to act swiftly, but also strategically. He couldn't just rush into this, he needed a plan. "All right," he said, his voice steely. "Let's take this to the board. We need to mobilize, secure every part of Tesla and SpaceX. The next move has to be deliberate, calculated." Over the next several days, Elon and Sarah worked tirelessly to get to the bottom of the conspiracy. They convened secret meetings with the heads of Tesla's legal and security teams, meticulously combing through the evidence that Sarah had gathered. It became clear that this was more than just a legal issue, it was an attack on everything Elon had built. They traced the source of the leaks back to one of his closest advisors, a trusted confidant who had been with him since the early days of Tesla. The betrayal was personal. The individual had been feeding information to Richard Howard in exchange for stock options in a rival company. Elon was shocked, but at the same time, he felt a strange sense of vindication. This wasn't just about legal battles, it was about his legacy, and someone had tried to destroy it from within. I never saw this coming, Elon said quietly to Sarah one evening as they sat in his office, reviewing documents. But now that I know who's behind it, I'm going to make sure they don't get away with it. Elon had never been one to shy away from confrontation. If anything, he had always welcomed the challenge. But this was different. This wasn't just about a lawsuit or corporate rivalry. It was about trust, about loyalty, and that made the sting of betrayal even harder to bear. He knew what he had to do. The first step was to confront the betrayer. And then, they would go public with the truth. Richard Howard and his corporate backers wouldn't be able to silence him. But Elon also knew that the battle wasn't over yet. Winning the legal fight wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The world was watching, and he would have to prove that he could not only overcome personal betrayal but also continue to lead the way toward a future beyond Earth. This was more than a business fight. It was a fight for the future of humanity. Elon sat at his desk in the dimly lit office, the weight of the information he had just uncovered pressing heavily on his mind. Sarah had left earlier, promising to begin the groundwork for a public disclosure of the betrayal. But Elon had his own plans. He wasn't going to wait for the betrayal to spread any further. He was going to act, and he was going to act fast. He stood up from his chair and walked over to the window, staring out at the horizon. The skyline of Palo Alto stretched in front of him, the faint glow of the city lights casting long shadows over the buildings. For a moment, he let his thoughts drift, back to the early days of Tesla, when everything seemed like an impossible dream. Back to when the world had doubted him, but he had kept going. This moment felt similar. The betrayal was personal, a knife to the back from someone he had trusted. But Elon had been here before. He knew how to turn adversity into opportunity. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number he had been avoiding for weeks. The call rang twice before the voice on the other end answered. Hello. It was Jason Hale, the advisor who had been with him since Tesla's earliest days. Elon had always relied on Jason for his business acumen and his loyalty. But now, that loyalty was in question. Elon. Jason's voice sounded tentative. What's going on? I heard you wanted to meet. I need to see you, Elon said, his voice cold, measured. Now. Jason hesitated, but then replied, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Elon ended the call without another word. As he stood there, the anger started to bubble up again, but he swallowed it. Anger would only cloud his judgment. He had to stay focused. Jason was going to be the first piece of the puzzle he needed to put this all together. And then, he'd deal with the rest. 30 minutes later, Jason arrived, stepping into Elon's office with a wary expression. The two men exchanged a quick, almost mechanical handshake, and Elon motioned for him to sit. I know why you're here, Elon said, his voice steady, though there was an underlying tension. And you know why I asked you to come. Jason's face flushed, but he quickly composed himself. Elon, look, whatever you're thinking, it's not what you. Elon held up a hand, cutting him off. You don't need to explain yourself. I already know everything. Jason's eyes widened in surprise. What? What are you talking about? I know you've been feeding information to Richard Howard, Elon said, his voice low but sharp, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. I know about the meetings, the stock options. I know about everything. Jason recoiled, the color draining from his face. His mouth opened and closed as if he was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Elon, I never meant for it to go this far, Jason stammered. It was just supposed to be a small thing. I never thought it would get out of hand like this. Elon stared at him, his gaze unflinching. A small thing? You've been betraying everything we built, Jason. Do you have any idea what that could do to my companies? To the future we're working toward? Jason's eyes darted nervously. I didn't mean for it to get personal, okay? I thought I could help, just a little, to make things work out better for both of us. Help? Elon's voice grew darker. You've been sabotaging us. You've been leaking confidential information, all to line your pockets with stock options from people who want to destroy everything I've worked for. And you didn't think that was personal? Jason shook his head, his face pale. I never meant to hurt you, Elon. I was just trying to survive, I saw an opportunity, and I thought. Elon slammed his hand on the desk, cutting him off. You thought. This isn't about thinking, Jason. It's about trust. You've violated it, and now you're going to have to face the consequences. Jason's face twisted with guilt and fear. What do you want me to do? I'll fix it, Elon. Whatever it takes, I'll fix it. Elon paused, his mind whirling. He could feel the anger rising, but at the same time, there was a part of him that understood Jason's desperation. It was a human weakness, greed, fear, ambition. And perhaps it was a weakness Elon himself had fought against in his own way. But that didn't excuse what Jason had done. The betrayal was too deep, too damaging. You've already done enough damage, Elon said finally, his voice hard. I don't need someone like you in my inner circle anymore. I'm done. Jason's face crumpled, and he stood up quickly, as if he were about to plead, but Elon held up his hand to stop him. Leave, Elon said simply, his voice void of emotion. And don't come back. Jason hesitated for a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the office without another word. Elon watched him go, feeling a strange emptiness wash over him. The confrontation with Jason was over, but the sting of betrayal remained. Elon was used to taking risks, used to being the one who pushed forward. But this? This was personal. He sat at his desk for a long time after Jason had left, staring at the empty chair across from him. The room felt colder, the silence more oppressive. But slowly, as the minutes passed, Elon felt the weight of the situation begin to lift. The anger had subsided, replaced by something else. Determination. Resolve. Elon knew what he had to do next. He wasn't going to let Jason's betrayal, or the threats from corporate rivals, derail his vision for the future. He would fight back, and he would win. Not just for Tesla, not just for SpaceX, but for humanity's future. But first, he had to ensure that the truth was made public. He had to take control of the narrative. The world needed to know exactly what had happened, and why. He picked up his phone and dialed Sarah. We're going public, he said, his voice resolute. It's time to expose everything. We're going to put an end to this once and for all. The decision was made. Elon was no longer going to play by anyone else's rules. He wasn't going to wait for the corporate vultures to take their shot. He was going to seize control of the narrative before they could. It was time for him to expose the web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation that had been running behind the scenes for months. The world had to know what had really been happening, and more importantly, who had been pulling the strings. Elon's mind raced as he and Sarah worked through their strategy late into the night. Every detail had to be perfect. One misstep could bring everything crashing down. By the time the sun began to rise, Elon had already contacted his legal team, the communications department, and several trusted journalists who had been in his corner for years. They would all play a part in the great unveiling. Elon stood in front of the cameras, his usual composure in place, though his mind was anything but still. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing like strobe lights in a frenzy. The world's most powerful media outlets were represented: CNN, BBC, Reuters, Bloomberg, and others. He knew the stakes. The questions they would ask, the scrutiny they would bring, it would all be designed to undermine him. But he was prepared. He glanced over at Sarah, who gave him a reassuring nod. She had been invaluable during the entire process, not just as a confidant, but as a strategist who understood how to navigate the corporate and legal landscape. She had helped him draft the statement he was about to make. It was a declaration of war against those who sought to destroy everything he had built. Elon stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and adjusted the microphone. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. "Thank you for joining me today," he began, his voice steady and clear, echoing through the packed room. "I'm here today to talk about a betrayal. A betrayal not only of me, but of every employee who has worked tirelessly to make Tesla and SpaceX the companies they are today. A betrayal of the very values we've built these companies upon: trust, innovation, and a commitment to change the world." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The reporters leaned in, their pens poised, ready to capture every syllable. "Over the past few months, we've uncovered a conspiracy within our own ranks. A conspiracy aimed at undermining the future of these companies and destroying everything we've worked for. This wasn't just about corporate espionage, it was personal. Some of the people I trusted most were involved. And one of those individuals, who had been a close advisor to me for years, was actively feeding confidential information to our competitors in exchange for personal gain." Elon could hear the gasp from the crowd. Cameras snapped relentlessly, capturing every reaction. "I'm talking about Jason Hale," he continued, his voice cold and unwavering. "A man I considered a friend. A man who I believed had my back through thick and thin. He's the one who was betraying us, leaking confidential data, and actively working with people who want to see Tesla and SpaceX fail." He allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment. The reporters were stunned, processing the magnitude of the revelation. Elon could feel the tension building in the room, but he wasn't done yet. "But this isn't just about Jason," Elon went on, his gaze intensifying. "It's about the people who enabled him. The corporate interests that are trying to tear down everything we've built. The people who don't care about innovation or progress, they care only about profit and power." Elon reached into the folder on the podium and pulled out a series of documents, holding them up for the cameras to see. "These are the documents that prove it," he said, his voice rising in a quiet fury. "Emails, memos, and contracts linking Jason Hale to Richard Howard and several other powerful figures in the tech world. This isn't a smear campaign, it's the truth. And I'm not going to let anyone try to silence it." As he spoke, Elon could feel the weight of his words settling in. He had just launched a full-scale counterattack against those who sought to destroy him. There was no turning back now. He had crossed the Rubicon, and there was no way to retreat from this battlefield. The aftermath of the press conference was immediate. News outlets scrambled to cover the explosive revelation, with journalists digging into the background of Jason Hale, Richard Howard, and the corporate figures involved. The world was now fully aware of the betrayal, and the public's reaction was swift. Social media erupted, with hashtags like #MuskVersusTheWorld trending worldwide. Supporters flooded Twitter and Facebook with messages of solidarity, while detractors seized the opportunity to attack. Elon was no stranger to public scrutiny, but this was different. The truth was on his side, and he knew that once the dust settled, he would come out stronger than ever. Tesla's stock price dropped in the immediate aftermath, but Elon wasn't worried. This was the storm before the calm. He had exposed the rot that had been festering inside his companies, and now it was time to rebuild. The loyal employees who had stuck with him through thick and thin would help him weather the storm. They would be the foundation upon which he would rebuild his reputation. Meanwhile, Richard Howard and his corporate allies were scrambling. They hadn't expected Elon to come out swinging so decisively. For the first time in a long while, they found themselves on the defensive. Howard issued a public statement denying any wrongdoing, but his words lacked the conviction Elon had just displayed. The public wasn't buying it. Elon smiled faintly to himself as he watched the chaos unfold. He had always been a fighter, but now, with the full force of the truth behind him, he was unstoppable. And this was only the beginning. His focus would remain on the bigger picture, on the future of space travel, on Mars, on the technology that could change humanity's course forever. But for now, he had one mission: to reclaim his company, his legacy, and his trust. He would come for those who had betrayed him, and he would ensure they never got a chance to rise again. Days turned into weeks as Elon moved with a sense of purpose, cutting through the distractions and keeping his focus on the ultimate goal. He had regained control of the narrative, but he knew that this battle was far from over. The corporate vultures weren't going to let go of the fight so easily. But he had taken the first step. Now, it was time to finish what he had started. In a high-stakes meeting with his board of directors, Elon laid out his plan for the future. Tesla's direction would remain steadfast, towards sustainable energy, electric vehicles, and the continued push to make the impossible possible. SpaceX would continue its mission to colonize Mars, ensuring that humanity's future was no longer tied to the Earth. "I've faced adversity before," Elon said, his voice steady. "And I've always come out on top. This is no different. We're going to rebuild, and we're going to be stronger than ever." The board members, many of whom had been skeptical of Elon's ambitious plans in the past, now rallied behind him. They had seen his resilience, his vision, and his unwavering commitment to the future. They knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter for Tesla and SpaceX. The storm Elon had unleashed with his press conference wasn't over. It had only just begun to make ripples, and already, the undercurrents of the legal battle were churning beneath the surface. Now, with the media frenzy at its peak, Elon knew the next step was paramount. He had already exposed the conspiracy, but the legal ramifications were just beginning. The corporations he had gone up against were not going to let this slip away without a fight. But Elon wasn't one to back down, especially when the stakes were high. He had made his move. Now it was time to deliver the knockout punch. The day of the hearing arrived with a charged atmosphere that seemed to hang over the entire city. Inside the court, the air was thick with anticipation. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispering under their breath as they prepared for what was about to unfold. The courtroom was packed, with media outlets, legal analysts, and a few curious onlookers filling every seat. Everyone knew this would be a pivotal moment in the saga, a moment where Elon Musk would make his move to ensure that the individuals behind the conspiracy faced the consequences of their actions. Elon entered the courtroom, accompanied by his legal team. His face was stoic, his eyes focused on the proceedings ahead. There was no sign of doubt in his demeanor, no hesitation in his step. He was ready for this. This was his world, the world where strategy, intellect, and resilience ruled. Across from him sat the corporate lawyers representing Richard Howard and the others involved in the conspiracy. Their smug, self-assured smiles were an attempt at intimidation, but Elon wasn't fazed. He knew the game they were playing, and he had something they didn't: the truth. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, Elon's team presented their case in meticulous detail. They laid out the timeline of events, the leaked emails, the underhanded dealings, and the corporate malfeasance that had been carefully orchestrated behind closed doors. The evidence was damning. But it was the final piece of the puzzle, the legal masterstroke, that would truly seal the deal. Elon had, with the help of his legal team, uncovered a key legal flaw in the contracts Jason Hale and the corporate figures had signed. It wasn't just about breach of trust or corporate espionage. No, this was something far more serious. The contracts contained a hidden clause that, if revealed, would expose their entire operation as not just unethical, but illegal. And Elon had it in his back pocket. As the court session broke for lunch, Elon stayed behind in the courtroom with his lead attorney, Samantha Green. She had been instrumental in formulating their strategy and knew the significance of the move they were about to make. Samantha was calm, but Elon could see the excitement in her eyes. The thrill of victory was within their grasp. "Elon, it's time," Samantha said quietly. "We've prepared for this moment. Are you ready to drop the bombshell?" Elon nodded. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His mind had always been a chessboard, and he was about to make the final, decisive move. The court reconvened, and the judge called for order. Everyone took their seats, the tension palpable. Elon stood up, signaling to the judge. "Your Honor, I request the court's permission to submit additional evidence," Elon said, his voice firm, yet measured. The judge raised an eyebrow, and the opposing counsel exchanged nervous glances. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Musk," one of the opposing lawyers said. "We've already presented our case. What more do you have to add?" Elon didn't flinch. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a set of documents across the table to the judge. The courtroom fell silent as the judge examined the papers. "I believe this is the final piece," Elon said, his voice unwavering. Samantha stepped forward to explain. "These documents reveal a legal discrepancy in the contracts signed by Mr. Hale and his associates. A clause they omitted could cause the entire arrangement to be classified as a fraudulent conspiracy. What they did wasn't just a breach of trust, it was a criminal act." The room was electric with tension. Richard Howard's legal team scrambled, their smug expressions quickly fading into panic as they realized what Elon had just dropped into their lap. The clause, which had gone unnoticed by the opposition until now, was the smoking gun they hadn't anticipated. The judge's face was unreadable, but Elon could tell this was the moment of truth. If the judge ruled in his favor, the entire case would collapse on the spot. The judge took a moment, carefully reading over the documents before looking up at Elon and his team. "Mr. Musk, if these documents are accurate," the judge said slowly, "this is a serious breach of the law. You are requesting an immediate investigation into the legality of these contracts, correct?" Elon didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe the law has been broken, and I demand accountability for those involved. This is not just a corporate issue, it's a matter of criminal law." The judge nodded, looking at both sides with a piercing gaze. "Very well. I will order an immediate injunction and a full investigation. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks to address the matter further." The opposing counsel stood, visibly rattled. One of the lawyers attempted to argue, but the judge had already made his decision. As the gavel came down and the session adjourned, the courtroom erupted into a low buzz of whispers and frantic discussions. Elon stood tall, a quiet confidence emanating from him. He had just delivered the knockout punch. The legal masterstroke had worked. The tide had turned in his favor, and the corporate vultures were now on the defensive. Back in the privacy of his office, Sarah couldn't contain her excitement. "Elon, that was brilliant. They never saw it coming." Elon leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a small smile. "They never do." But as the relief of the victory settled in, Elon knew this was far from over. The legal investigation would unfold over the next few weeks, and the public would be watching every step. Richard Howard and his allies would try to fight back, but now they were on the back foot. The game had changed, and the next chapter was about to unfold. Elon knew there would be challenges ahead, but he had already proven that he could take on the giants of the corporate world and win. His resolve was unshaken, and his focus was on the future. He had come through the storm, and now he was stronger than ever. But as he stood up and looked out the window of his office, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. This was only a battle. The war was far from over. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal motions, court hearings, and media frenzy. The atmosphere surrounding Elon was electric. He had struck a major blow against the corporate forces that had tried to destroy him, but there was still much work to be done. He couldn't rest yet. The world was watching, and he had to keep his focus on the bigger picture. The legal investigation into the fraudulent contracts had begun, and the scrutiny on Richard Howard and his associates was intense. Headlines screamed with each new development, "Elon Musk strikes back." "Corporate conspiracy unraveled." "Howard's empire in shambles." The public had rallied behind Elon, eager to see justice served, but the corporate forces were not going down without a fight. Elon knew that Howard and the other guilty parties would do everything in their power to discredit him. They had resources, connections, and an army of lawyers who could drag this process out for years. But he also knew that the truth was on his side. He had exposed the rot at the heart of the corporate world, and now he would finish what he had started. Elon's legal team, led by Samantha Green, had been relentless in pursuing the case. The team had uncovered even more evidence that implicated not just Howard and his cronies but also several other key figures in the tech industry who had been complicit in the plot to undermine Tesla and SpaceX. But there was one key problem: the court system, despite the growing evidence, was slow to act. There was a constant threat that the case might drag on longer than Elon could tolerate. That's when Samantha came to him with a suggestion. "We have to go for a settlement," she said one afternoon in his office. "We've already won the public battle, and we've exposed their conspiracy. But now we need to put the final nail in the coffin, force them to settle before it costs them everything." Elon leaned back in his chair, considering her words. He knew what this would mean. A settlement would allow him to avoid prolonged legal battles, but it also meant he would need to demand something substantial in return. "A settlement is risky," Elon said, his eyes narrowing. "What are you proposing?" Samantha smiled. "We don't just want money or a public apology. We want them to step down. Howard, Hale, the whole group. We demand that they sell their shares in Tesla and SpaceX and never again have any stake in our companies." Elon paused, then nodded. It was a bold move, but it was the only way to ensure that the people who had betrayed him and his companies would never again be in a position to harm them. The final showdown would take place behind closed doors in a high-powered negotiation room. Elon and Samantha walked into the conference room, where Richard Howard and his legal team were already waiting. Howard's expression was a mixture of arrogance and desperation. He had been forced to retreat into the shadows ever since Elon's explosive press conference, but now he was back in the game, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Musk," Howard said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "I must admit, you've played this rather well. But you must know, the fight isn't over. You can't expect us to just roll over." Elon didn't flinch. "This is your last chance. You and your people have been caught. The world knows what you did. If you want to avoid total ruin, you'll accept my terms." Howard's lawyer tried to interject, but Elon held up a hand, silencing him. "The terms are simple," Elon said, his voice cold. "Step down. Sell your shares in both Tesla and SpaceX. You're out. You'll never work in this industry again. And I'll make sure that no one else in the tech world is ever allowed to trust you again." Howard's face flushed with anger, but he knew he was cornered. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and any fight in court would be a public relations disaster. The media had already turned against him, and no one in the corporate world would dare stand by him now. After several moments of tense silence, Howard let out a heavy sigh. "Fine," he said, his voice strained. "We'll accept your terms." The settlement was finalized, and Elon had emerged victorious. Richard Howard and his co-conspirators were forced to step down, sell their shares, and disappear from the public eye. Their empire had crumbled, and Elon's name had been solidified as the man who had exposed the corruption and fought back against the corporate giants who tried to take him down. The news spread like wildfire across the globe. Headlines cheered Elon's triumph: "Musk outwits the corporate elite." "Elon's masterstroke shakes the tech world." Tesla's stock soared, SpaceX received new investment, and Elon's reputation as an innovative leader and fighter for justice had never been stronger. But the victory wasn't just personal. Elon knew that this was a win for everyone who believed in the power of innovation, integrity, and progress. He had taken on the most powerful forces in the business world, and won. As Elon sat in his office, looking out over the sprawling Tesla campus, he reflected on everything that had led to this moment. It had been a long, difficult journey. He had faced betrayal, doubt, and uncertainty at every turn. But he had never lost sight of his vision. He had always known that the future of humanity wasn't just about electric cars or rockets, it was about creating a better world, one where people could overcome the darkness and rise above the forces that sought to keep them down. His phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sarah. "You did it. The future is yours." Elon smiled, but there was no time to rest. There was still much work to do. The world was changing fast, and Elon had no intention of slowing down. There were new frontiers to explore, new technologies to develop, and new challenges to overcome. The fight for the future was just beginning. And this time, he was ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?